And we're live to review Season 5, which was a little bit of an improvement over the previous season. And to find out how it was an improvement, and listen on, over to his Jeffness, Mr. Jeff.
I'm glad you said that because you reminded me of something I was going to ask you, because I told Ben before we started this video that I re-listened to the Season 3 in review video. I didn't quite get to Season 4, but on the Season 3 video, I told Ben that there are some in the fandom of Homicide who considered Season 3 the last great season of Homicide. And Ben asked me, after I said that, are you telling me it's downhill from here? So I wanted to ask Ben, since he's now seen 2 full seasons since then, whether you think it's been downhill or what, however you think it's improved or about the same from Season 3.
I think the dialogue in Season 4 started to get a bit dull. Realistic, but dull. And I wanted dialogue with a bit more sparkle, but that also sounded realistic. Because sort of like the worst of both, the worst thing is to have, like, as you talked about, bad sitcom dialogue where people are just delivering one-liners. And I was saying that I like the dialogue in the first season, especially in the first episode. That's almost like the prototype of like how to write these characters. And I think Jeff was saying that it gets back to that in Season 5 when David Simon came into the show full time. And his influence in the style of dialogue was shown in Season 5. And I thought, yes, the dialogue improved. Where it wasn't as good as the first. I mean, it would be nice for it to be all as good as the first episode. But with that first episode, folks, they would have been working on it so much. They would have just been pouring over it and over it and over it and over it to make as good as they can. Whereas you've got 22 episodes in this season. But I would say, in general, the dialogue is better written in this.
Well, the actual writer of the very first episode, Paul Attanasio, had moved on. He wasn't writing for Homicide anymore, so that it's part of it, not the whole thing. Obviously, a lot of other influence went into that, but he's credited as the writer on a couple of episodes.
Yes, there's lots of Writers Guild rules about who gets credited with. Because
I just figured I would ask you that question off the top because when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing to ask him about what his opinion is now that we're 2 more seasons in. But
yeah, and I think I said Munch got less interesting in season 4. I don't know if Munch came back fully because I think you were saying that Richard Bells was using a lot of his act in the early first 2 seasons, and also the scenes with Bolander were better for him.
Yeah, Munch was definitely hurt by the loss of Bolander. I mean, as the show as a whole was, I think they were able to move on from that, but his character definitely misses having that strong partner character that can really play off of. He up to this point had not really had that since Bolander left. I think it'll be a little bit of an uptick of that in the next season, and we'll get to that. But yeah, this one was a little up and down. There were times in which he seemed to disappear for a while or just there to make a few sarcastic comments, and he wasn't in much. And then there were other episodes that featured him a little more with varying degrees of success. But anyway, Season 5 started with a 2-part story called Hostage. So to me, it peaked at the beginning because that was my favorite story of the whole year, was the beginning. And the main... I'm just going to do kind of brief recaps of what happened in these episodes to try to jog Ben's memory a bit.
Yeah.
So it's Pembleton returns to duty over the objections of the top brass who want him shipped to a position with no responsibilities, but he has trouble coping with the physical and mental limitations placed on him by his stroke. G learns that Russard has moved to France to live with a diplomat whose baby she is carrying. Bayless and Munch team up on the shooting death of a Mrs. Uba, with a pet pig as the only witness. As they begin to track down her son, who owns the pig, a gunman invades a middle school and takes a classroom hostage after killing 2 staff members. And in the second part, the middle school gunman demands that his pet pig be brought to him, then shoots and critically injures a female student and sets the classroom on fire after the police fail to do so. After the hostages are rescued, revealing a teacher and a student were killed earlier, and he's taken to the hospital with severe burns. The squad connects the incident with Mrs. Uba's murder and realizes that her son Jerry committed both crimes. The injured young girl dies, and G is angry that the DA's office wants to wait to charge Uba with his crimes because he's now incapacitated and hospitalized, and they would save a lot of money by not starting the legal process until he recovered enough to be sent to prison. Danvers agrees to charge Uba while he rots in his hospital bed. Meanwhile, Danvers gets engaged. Pendleton stops taking his medication after discovering its effect on his mental focus and sexual relations with Mary, and Munch learns that Brody has been evicted and offers to let him move in. So there's a real there's a recap of what happened in that story. But I'll just say on my part, it's my favorite of the season because it really shows you like what Homicide is capable of in different areas. In some of the dialogue that Ben was talking about, in the ability of the characters, the actors to stretch themselves, into situations, and Andre Braugher having to act Frank as recovering from the stroke, and how that affects everybody else, including Bayless, of course, his partner, having to deal with working without Frank, as well as sort of acting as a caretaker for Frank, as is his nature to do. And we saw in this season, occasionally with these, I may kind of talk about things in other episodes, just sort of relate how it went across the whole season. And in this, you had later on in the season, after Frank was basically recovered from the stroke, Bayless moved on to sort of taking care of his uncle that had abused him. But early in the season, it was Frank that he wanted to take care of. So you see his protector role kind of shifts to who he feels like he needs to be protecting or helping take care of it in a particular time. But you also had good action sequences. As the picture's been showing, you had good guest actors, portraying interesting characters that they would come across, and everybody was realistic. The pacing was good. You had a crime that once again illustrated that there's not always some amazing master plan for somebody who takes hostages or kills people. Sometimes it's really just sort of stuff that happens.
Acts of desperation.
For what seems to not be a real good reason for anybody else involved. And you had QRT involved. You had Howard getting to actually act as a supervisor. You had Frank trying the exam there. You had Ann Mira as a guest, as a teacher there. She was, of course, more famous for being part of a comedy team with her husband Jerry Stiller, but she was good in that in a dramatic role in this. So it was really a little bit of everything, and a lot of what makes Homicide great. So that was why I liked it. So
I don't really remember it. He had that pic. Was there a guy in it in a Dennis the Menace type top, or was that? I think that was a different episode, wasn't it?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Because they had that pig running down the. Because I remember there was another one. There was a funny chase with someone with Lewis, and a guy in a Dennis the Menace top, a big burly guy.
No, that was back. That was in the previous season.
Yes. I think we'll move on to. I can't really remember.
That was a human, not a pig.
Yes, I just wondered if it was part of this as well. Yeah, so it took me a while to go through the new. Was it a new intro sequence for this season?
Yes.
Yes, that's what hence all of these images, folks. I'll now move on to the next one.
All right.
Because I ain't got much to say.
Well, that's fine. I mean, you can't force you to say anything. So, the next one was Prison Riot, which guest starred Charles S. Dutton as Elijah Sanborn and Dean Winters as Tom Morans. That's the name I couldn't think of in the last one when I was talking about Scott Winters, the guy who plays the informant in the season finale, his brother Dean Winters played Tom Moran's. Anyway, the recap of the Prison Riot episodes is at the state penitentiary. Well, see, you're going through pictures of the part 2 of Hostage, though. That's the same story. So.
Oh, right. Well, when are we going to talk about part 2 of Hostage?
Well, I talked about both of them already, so feel free.
Oh, all right. Okay, I'll just zip through these, but you can see good acting there. Oh, yes, this is where you said that you and Morgan talked about how G will still act in charge, even in situations where he's not technically in charge.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about, how that's an ESTJ characteristic, that they're always supervising somebody. They're always telling somebody what to do. And in that situation, he was, I think most people would agree, morally justified when there's a victim of the killer who needs attention and they're tending to the killer, and G's like, no, you're going to stop what you're doing and take care of this one first.
Right, that was a good technical point, that they didn't want to charge him because then they didn't want to pick up the tab for...
Yeah, that's another great thing about, the shows, those little elements of, like, the realism of, how the prosecuting office, they're always thinking about budget and stuff, and when people talk about justice or whatever, there's always those other considerations about the money, about the politics of things, not just justice.
I mean, there are some people who get thrown into prison just for the healthcare. And prison healthcare is pretty crappy. But better than nothing.
Well, right. Yeah, I mean, you're going to have people that say go for the meals because they don't have any food.
And a lot of people, it's because the mental health institutions are not there. And they want the structure.
Right. I was about to say the structure that people live they're on the outside. Their whole life is chaos. That going to prison is actually not a vacation, but it's stability in their life that they don't have. Anyway,
I'm now caught up.
That segues nice into the Prison Riot episode. To say, at the state penitentiary, a cafeteria scuffle turns into a riot that leaves 2 inmates dead. The whole squad, except for Pimbleton, starts to investigate, but no one, including several killers apprehended in previous episodes, is willing to provide any information. Bayless concentrates on inmate Elijah Sanborn, played by Charles S. Dutton, trying to use the news of his son's recent arrest as leverage to get the facts, but the truth only comes out after a second assault occurs in the prison. Meanwhile, Pimbleton begins target practice in hopes of qualifying on the firing range so he can return to full duty. So there's the brief synopsis. On the previous Hostage story, as far as the scores, Ben gave both episodes an 8. I gave both a 10, so the average would be 9 for those. Ben always has to take pictures of any computers or technology in the episodes to make comments about those.
Yeah.
I believe I said at the time, and I'll say again, that I think this was a very good episode. But because I loved the Hostage story so much, it felt like a little bit of sort of a letdown after that, in terms of it didn't have nearly as much intensity and characterization. There was more time spent on the guest characters, which, I'm fine with that happening from time to time, but it was just a little bit in sequence. It was a little bit of a letdown. If I just see it as an independent thing, it would probably be a pretty good showcase for Homicide. And in fact, TV Guide ranked it among their list of 100 greatest episodes of television shows. So they obviously liked it a lot. But yeah, you had some good acting and some good intense scenes.
Very good acting.
It was another example of Bayless having a case where he had to work without Frank and sort of continued to establish his character separate from Pimbleton. And there was a little bit saw a little bit into the character of Kellerman too, and the different way that he was interrogating people versus the way Bayless did. And when somebody, one of the people that Kellerman had put away, tried to get up in his face and taunt him about stuff, Kellerman basically came back with, well, I get to go home and sleep in my own bed tonight. Meanwhile, you're stuck here, kind of thing. So you had a little bit of Kellerman showing he could give it back as well as take it.
Right. That's interesting. You got Kellerman and Bayliss on his boat. They didn't really talk to each other much after this episode, did they? He's taking Juliana back there.
Yeah, they had their ups and downs, but of course they're got a little bit fractured after Kellerman was under investigation because Bayliss was maybe a little bit suspicious of him.
Right.
Being more of the authority truster that he is.
Right.
Do you have anything else to say about Prison Riot?
Just very good acting by, what is it, Charles S. Dutton.
Mm-hmm.
Mixed feelings about casting him because he was an ex-criminal. But you actually said that he went around, trying to dissuade people from the criminal path.
Oh yeah, he was real big on that. All right, so Ben gave that episode a 9. I gave it an 8 for an average of 8.5.
A lot of that would have been due to the acting.
Yep. So next was Bad Medicine, which was when David Simon says really kicked into gear as far as his writing on the show, because that was the first, once he became a staff writer, that was the first episode that he was responsible for writing. And basically sort of, even though Luther Mahoney had been introduced before that, it was David Simon's job to kind of inject the realism into it based on what he knew about, drug dealers and that kind of stuff. So he had to sort of balance that, of course, with the more Hollywood aspects that, the network wanted and things like that. So, but he still cited one of his favorite scenes that he wrote for the show, the interrogation scene of Luther Mahoney that happens near the end of the episode, where he said there's sort of that mind game being played between him and Lewis. But anyway, the synopsis of this episode: drug addicts all over Baltimore are dying from a batch of adulterated heroin sold by a dealer in competition with Luther Mahoney. After the dealer is found murdered, narcotics detective Terry Stivers works with the homicide unit to build a conspiracy case against Mahoney and cut off the supply of bad drugs at the same time. The case falls apart when the only witness, Stivers' informant, is also killed. Kellerman is put on desk duty after the entire arson unit becomes the target of a federal investigation for corruption. Pemberton fails his firearms test and begins taking his medication again, and Brody moves in with Bayliss after Munch throws him out. So,
is it ever specified why Munch throws out Brody?
No. No, it's not. Except he tells him he shouldn't have looked in the medicine cabinet. So yeah, Ben mentioned actually off the air before we started, the guest star that plays the informant, Akili Prince is his name, and yeah, he's a good actor that I've seen in several other things. There he is right there. So yeah, to me the most compelling part of this episode, even though I enjoyed his performance and a lot of the stuff with Lewis and Kellerman and Stivers and the drug angle, I also really liked the parts with Frank, especially where they didn't cop out and have him to being ready for duty. He failed the test, and the scene where he explains to G how close he was and what happened to him is just a really good intense scene. So I enjoyed that quite a bit, as well as the interrogation of Mahoney and all that stuff, where he basically gets tripped up. Mahoney gets tripped up into it and into a sort of admission, but it's not something that's gonna hold up in court. So he strolls out of there knowing that that they know he did it, but they can't get him. And then, of course, as you saw there, Vernon Troy, the informant, gets found dead at the end of the episode. So Danvers at that point says, the case is not going to happen.
Yeah, and that was something I liked about the series, that they actually brought in a sort of like a Mr. Big, a sort of a criminal with a little bit more brains.
Yeah. And as we'll get to later in the season, you know, when we're talking about that episode, I'll talk more about it. But in that same interview on the DVD with David Simon, he explains that they sort of made him too big, maybe, and the network was like, okay, you need to kill him off. So then they had to come up with the way to do that.
Right.
Anything else you wanted to say about Bad Medicine?
No, but I liked the introduction of. I thought it was just generally a good arc episode in terms of the season arc with Mahoney.
Mm-hmm.
This next one will going on to the next episode's images.
All right, so Bad Medicine, Ben gave it an 8. I gave it a 9 for an average of 8.5. The next episode was called M.E., Myself, and I, and this is the one that introduces Dr. Juliana Cox, who arrives in Baltimore to begin working as the chief medical examiner and look after her ailing father, who soon dies. The FBI begins to question detectives as part of the corruption investigation, setting Kellerman's nerves on edge. As Bayless and Lewis probe the death of a prostitute, a homeless man quickly confesses to both her murder and that of a second woman whose name never appeared on the board. With help from the detective, she learns that one of her staff members deliberately misclassified the earlier death as an overdose, then fires him. Bayless throws Brody out, whereupon he moves in with Lewis and inadvertently touches off an argument that may end his marriage. And that was the FBI investigator was named Thomas Pandolfi and was played by Edward Herman. So yeah, those were the two main plots going in that one. I remember at the time I said that even though I don't really have any problem with Michelle Forbes' performance, I thought they spent a little bit too much time on introducing a new character. Like it was too much of the episode devoted to her and sort of thrown in there and like, oh, you're supposed to care about this new person. And I really thought that could have been done in a less clumsy way. So it's good for what it is. I just disagree with some of their choices. This woman, on the other hand, I was never a fan of. This is the federal prosecutor woman that I don't think she's a bad actor. It's just you talked about choices before, and that's what it was, whether it was her or the director. I didn't like that she did this sort of I'm going to try to be like the female Clint Eastwood kind of attitude about stuff. That was just kind of off-putting.
It's like she was like too sexually confident. The choice of like playing her like she was like some sort of seductress in like a film noir.
Yeah, honestly,
kind of
I
thing.
think it would have been better. It would have been more realistic and probably funnier to have her be sort of the opposite type, be an older lady who was very no nonsense and kind of just. And the frustration with Kellerman was that she's too by the book and she's just going to take care of this stuff and she doesn't care whether she railroads him in the process. That I think would have been more effective than having this character, but that's what they decided to do. So
I think maybe the actress, maybe young actress, maybe she thought, oh, I want to go on TV. I want to be sexy. I want to try and make an impression, get a film career going, that sort of thing. Maybe trying too hard.
Could be.
But again, and I will give directors a little bit of slack in this, is that they've not really got a lot of power to guide performances on TV. I know she's like a guest thesp actress, but yeah, she wasn't bad. It's just the choices to play it a little bit. It wasn't. I just felt that she fancied herself a little bit too much. But there are people like that in real life. Right.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that there aren't anybody like that. I just didn't really enjoy that very much.
Yeah, and of course, we sort of view this differently because when you watched this, you knew that this storyline with Kellerman wasn't really going anywhere in the end.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that storyline.
Spoiler, folks! It doesn't really go anywhere.
What?
spoiler, folks, it doesn't really go anywhere, this storyline.
Yeah, well, it does. There are some things within it that give people an opportunity for good scenes and good performances. I just didn't really care for that aspect of the story.
Yeah, I suppose the only thing it leads to really is the good episode with Kellerman when he almost, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
When we get to it, when he almost does something. Right. So we'll just try and get through these. Look, like these looks that she's giving, she's trying to be seductive. Right. And I think I just put that in because I like the reaction shot there. Pendleton.
Yeah, you made a comment at the time, Andre Braugher having good facial expressions.
Yep. And I think Michelle Forbes is such a good actress. That's why I put a picture in here of like her in Battlestar Galactica. And she wasn't in Battlestar Galactica much, but she was so good playing Admiral Kane. And then even here, like in these early scenes, like she's flirting with Bayliss, and Bayliss is definitely flirting with her.
Okay, that's from the next one. So, did you have anything else to say about Amy, myself, and I before we get to the?
No, I think that was in the same episode.
No, this is the next one. I promise.
This is the next one. No, this is. Oh, I think you know what. I think you know what might have happened is this might have been that point where we got them in the wrong order, or where I got them in the wrong order.
Yeah, it was.
Right. So I've been showing the episodes in the wrong order.
No, it's been right up to this point.
Right.
This is just the next one. So that's what I'm saying. Did you have any, before you keep flying through these, did you have anything to say about Amy, myself, and I?
I don't know, but I think what happened is that's the flashback. See, I don't know. I'm all confused because I watched it in a different order from you because I watched it. And then
no, yes, you didn't. Just stop, pause for a second.
I thought I did, and then you told me not to, and then I went back and then I did. I can't remember.
No, it was only those 2 episodes that you watched White Lies first, because and then you watched Amy, myself, and I. So it was only 2 episodes that got flipped.
Yes, because the first one I watched is when I think I saw Dr. Cox.
Yeah, so you saw her introduction after you saw an episode she was already in.
Yeah.
So anyway,
But I'm wondering, am I showing the right episode on screen at the moment?
Well, you kept going after I told you to stop, but you, you showed them in the right order. You just kept going into the next episode.
Oh, I thought all of this was the same episode because that's how I've saved them.
No, like I said, at the beginning it was, and then it changed to the other one.
Oh, because I've saved them in different folders. Like these images were from episode 5.
Well, no, some of them weren't. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, now I can open. Oh, right. That's where 5.06 might have gone. Is you're quite right, Jeff. That might be 5.06 and 5.05 and 5.06. Oh, I see. So it looks like they've been combined together in that folder.
Well, yeah, I mean, you probably did that at the time because once you found out that there was the other episode, you just did that or something. I don't know, but
right.
Yeah, Amy, myself, and I was the one that actually introduced Dr. Cox, but she did still figure prominently in the next one, White Lies,
right?
Because that was the one where she had to, where they had the case where the guy's wife had the heroin overdose and he tried to cover it up.
Ah, right. I can show images for that one.
Okay, well, as far as the previous one,
yeah.
We both gave it 8s, so that would be an average of 8. And then White Lies, what happened in that one is when an article on the corruption probe appears in the Baltimore Sun, Kellerman loses his temper and confronts a businessman who had been a suspect in the arson murders that brought him into the homicide unit. Both of them take polygraph exams, but the results prove inconclusive. Munch investigates the seemingly inexplicable death of a young woman, which, now, once again, don't start flying through those pictures because that's the next episode.
This is the wrong one. This is not the right one.
No, it's not. That's The Heart of a Saturday Night. That's episode 7.
Right, and we're still on episode 6. Okay, I'll go back to that one. Right.
Yeah,
okay,
so
Jeff, take it away.
The one you skipped was actually episode 5. So anyway, Munch investigates the seemingly inexplicable death of a young woman, which continually frustrates him until Cox discovers the cause, a heroin overdose. Examining an old file, Pemberton uncovers information that gives Bayless a chance to clear his only open case of the year. After being thrown out by Lewis, Brody turns down Howard's offer to stay with her.
Because of her hair. Her hair is too attractive to him.
Yeah. So that was the one that featured, that prosecutor that you were showing the pictures of earlier.
Right. This chick.
Yeah. Whereas the previous episode was the one where everybody was being interviewed by the FBI guy, and Cox was.
I mean, you can see the poses that she's making. She really fancies herself. Like, get on the catwalk. Right. Okay. So I'll try and pick an image that fits what you're talking about. Right. So we're talking about this guy.
Yeah, that's the guy. That's
right.
And the wife, where Munch notices that, she's got makeup on, even though supposedly she was sleeping. So he figures out that she tried to cover it up, but of course he initially thinks it's because he killed her. As we find out, it turns out that she had killed herself with drugs, and he was embarrassed by it, wanting to cover it up.
Right. Right. Is there anything you would like me to show in particular?
No, because I don't. Contrary to just your viewpoint, just how many times I've seen these episodes, that I haven't memorized every picture from them or anything. So I don't have magic recall of all that.
Right.
But as you said, there are flashbacks in this episode for Frank.
Yep.
And he's looking in the box, and he starts seeing flashbacks to scenes of himself in the box in different confrontations with people, because he hasn't been in there since he had the stroke.
And later on in the series, he says why he actually does the job, and that because of his ability to perform in the box.
Yeah.
And I think, is that when they talk about that in this scene? Is that in this scene?
Yeah, I think so, actually.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the gist of that was, I don't remember the exact quote, but he said, it was the rush of knowing he got his suspect and he had him.
And you reel him in.
Yeah, that was better than caffeine or nicotine or other chemical-induced highs. So, as I said at the time, I think that he did a good job of describing the SP temperament in terms of there has to be something that we find in what we do. We can get that feeling from. It's not the same thing for everybody, but for Frank, that's what it is. And that's why somebody who you wouldn't think would, fit the profile of a police detective can do the job, because they have to find that thing that really is what makes them love the job, even if there's a bunch of things in the job they don't like. That's the element that they do. And yeah, I said at the time, like I actually knocked the episode down a point because of these scenes near the end with Cox and the husband, because they were completely unnecessary and didn't really make sense for her to be going and interviewing that guy in the jail. She's the medical examiner. She's not. Even if you could say that somehow she talked her way in there, it still didn't really have anything to do with anything else other than just her deciding to she was going to do that. So anyway, both of us gave that one a 7. It was the next episode that we had our biggest divergent opinion of the season, because I liked The Heart of a Saturday Night a lot, and Ben did not, or at least he didn't on the day he was tired. But what happened in that one is, at a support group meeting for family members of murder victims, 3 of the squad's cases are described. The carjacking in which a young mother is shot, worked by Lewis and Munch, a brawl at the waterfront that leaves a man dead, worked by G, and a teenage girl found strangled and dumped in an alley, worked by Bayless. G and Bayless both closed their cases, the latter with Pendleton's help. Cox arrives late and reveals that while her father was suffering from a terminal illness, he actually died of injuries when he was the victim of a hit-and-run car accident. So, yeah, we definitely diverged in our opinions of this. I thought the format was really effective, the way they decided to do the storytelling. They had good guest actors who played those characters well and gave us sort of a different perspective, while still not as quite a radical departure as the Gas Man was back in season 3, where you had things from the criminal's point of view. This, you had the focus on the victims, but you still had plenty of scenes of, showing the detectives in their assorted cases. I like episodes with multiple cases, so I liked that aspect of it. I liked, the kind of storytelling aspect where the victims were telling the stories at the same time as we were seeing how the detectives were handling it. So I thought there was a ton of good elements and good aspects, and I even teared up at the scene where they find the kid and reunited her with her father.
Why do you like multiple cases?
It makes it seem more like you're really following a real police squad, because it's on TV so much of the time it's like one case is dominating everything, whereas in real life that doesn't happen nearly as often. I mean, maybe in a small town where you don't have that many murders, it would be, but in a place like Baltimore or New York or Detroit or Chicago, I mean, they got murders happening every day. So there's not, all the detectives in the squad are not going to be at the scene of one murder. That just doesn't happen. So I like episodes where they show that the detectives are all busy on different things.
Do you like them to the sort of cases to be given equal time?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I don't mind them focusing a little bit more on one case than the others, but I don't think it should be like, well, this is the dominant case, and then we sort of barely touch on something else. I like it when they kind of go. You were saying how you liked the dialogue in the very first episode. I liked that as well, but the other thing I liked about that was how they went back and forth from the different characters on their respective cases. And they really, the times that they got together were things that they normally would, like lunch, or having a drink after work. They were together and talking about things. But in the meantime, they were all working on separate cases. And I like that better than everybody's working on the same thing. So, did you have anything else you wanted to say about that episode?
No, not really. It didn't really tie into any of the arc.
All right, so Ben gave that episode 5, which is his lowest rating yet, and I gave it a 10. So that works out to an average of about 7.5. All right, the next one was called The True Test, featuring a guest appearance by young Elijah Wood, who, of course, is better known these days as Frodo from the Lord of the Rings movies. Lewis and Bayless worked the murder of a black student at an exclusive, nearly all-white prep school. The case takes a political turn when their focus shifts to an arrogant, manipulative student whose mother is a Baltimore court judge. One of the victim's roommates confesses to the crime, but the detectives continue working to uncover the rest of the facts. Reinstated to full duty after a successful firearms exam, Pendleton wonders if he can trust himself to enter the box again. Kellerman meets Cox for the first time, offers Brody a place to stay on his boat, and learns that several members of the arson unit have agreed to testify against him. So this one, I gave it a 7, and like I said, that's still a good episode. There were certain frustrating elements to it, as I recall, where some of the things they sort of had in there to make more of an impact really didn't as much to me. That thing with Brody and it did sort of establish him as more of an intuitive type. I think the fact that he was doing this, I'm going to take pictures of things like water moving and stuff like that and make metaphors to the. But honestly, I was thinking, why isn't he out there on the murder case? Isn't that what he's supposed to be doing? is videotaping the crime scene, and he wasn't out there. Yeah, there were some good scenes in this one. I don't in any way mean to say that it was bad, but they kind of were like, oh, we've set up this badass kid, and yeah, he was all right, but there was almost a little bit too much focus on that aspect of it. Like, I did like the interaction with Bayless and the judge, and we had some computer talk from mid-90s. At Cyber Cafe, or as I said at the time, like as they call them now, every public place. Because pretty much so many places have internet available now. But yeah, obviously a lot of pictures Ben took of the technology at the time. So yeah, good performances in my opinion. And that was the scene where G told Pimbleton that he passed the firearms exam while he was on the toilet. And then Lewis got to be a little bit of the bad cop, good cop with Bayless, because Bayless kind of played the role of the intimidator, big 6'4" guy, and Lewis was more like, oh, I'm just a lowly cop, so just trying to do my job, so help me out here so I don't lose my job kind of thing. His attitude he took with the kid.
Oh, there's a thing here about a bit of backstory where Bayless, about his family and the class system.
Yeah, his cousin wanted to get into that school and they wouldn't let him because his family wasn't prominent enough.
Yeah. Just shooting through all these images. Oh yeah, and this is where the judge realizes a little bit that her son is maybe a little bit of a bad
well, I think
example.
she already knew that.
a bad, not necessarily the poster boy of a role model for ESTPs.
And she was aware of that. And Morgan, by the way, again, says that he didn't think that kid's an ESTP. So I kind of agreed with him. I'm not sure that he is either. Because he seemed like more of a...
Just a side... Oh, yes, because you said that he was... Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I remember you saying at the time because he thought ahead too much.
Yeah, he was more strategic, and he was more interested in sort of having minions that he controlled and having this whole operation. It wasn't just like, for kicks kind of thing. We've had plenty of criminals on this show that have been just a, crime for the fun of it kind of attitude, and he didn't have that. He was more like trying to have his fingers on everything. So
right, I have not got ones for 509. What happened in 509? Unless...
Okay, so the true test we both gave it a 7, so an average of 7 on that. You do have some pictures, at least, because you were able to get that thumbnail of Luther Mahoney, but the next episode is called Control. And with Bayless as primary, Pimbleton takes his first case since returning to duty, the murders of a woman and her 2 sons in their own home. The detectives have different theories about the case, with Pimbleton favoring the woman's boyfriend and Bayless focusing on her ex-husband. They have trouble following each other's leads, but eventually work together in the box to catch the killer. A witness at a drug dealer shooting points Lewis and Munch to Junior Bunk, Luther Mahoney's nephew, who readily incriminates Mahoney, but is then intimidated into recanting his statement. Brody gets evicted from Kellerman's boat, then tries and fails to talk both G and Russert into giving him a room. Kellerman receives a grand jury summons and spends the night with cops. So, that was the episode that featured the confrontation with Luther Mahoney and Lewis at the bar, where Lewis tells him he's on his corner and basically kicks him out of the bar. And we're introduced to Junior Bunk.
Right. I'm looking. I don't know. I'm trying to find the crabs.
Yeah. The other case, the main case, Pendleton and Bayless were working. It was the military guy that ended up, was the ex-husband that killed the wife. And the reason it's called Control, because the whole thing was like he was this very buttoned up kind of controlled guy, but then he went crazy when he killed his ex-wife, but then he very calmly executed his children. So it was a totally different style of killing. So originally they thought maybe it was two different people, but it was more like the two sides of him, because he lost his temper. Like they had the scene in the box where Bayless kept messing with his jacket to get on his nerves.
Wow.
Wow, what?
That seems like a long time ago, that review.
Well, it wasn't that long though, but it was several weeks since we've been doing these, only one a week. That would have been that would have been about 13 weeks ago, 12 or 13.
Right. Was that the guy? Was he in Vietnam?
Might have been. I don't remember if he said that or not.
That might have been another episode where there was a guy that was in Vietnam.
I don't remember if that was mentioned specifically or not.
No, that might have been a previous season.
Yeah, he seemed like he was a little young to have been in Vietnam.
No.
I'm thinking they made him out to be probably like late 30s. So that would have been a little young.
Yeah, I do remember that stuff about messing with his jacket.
Yeah, like once Bayless figured out he was a J, then he started doing all of these things to rile up his order and organization, and make him ruffled.
Right.
And it eventually worked because he lost his temper in the box too, the same way that they, surmised that he did with his ex-wife.
Well, I do have graphics for the next one, Blood Wedding.
And they have that scene at the end where, in contrast to the one where they have Cox go and talk to the husband for no apparent reason, Pendleton goes and talks to the husband and asks him, why did you kill your kids? Were you trying to rescue them from, what they would have to deal with from you killing their mother? And he actually asked, the killer asked himself, is that why I did it? So it was like he didn't even have a reason. And so it reinforces once again that viewpoint of, there's not always some explanation.
No, I thought that was a good saying.
Yeah, it was. And Pendleton's even more kind of disillusioned by that. Because he knows that, but at the same time, it was like he was reaching for something to try to justify that in his mind. And, now that he has a child of his own, why somebody would do that to their own children, and he couldn't find it. So Ben gave that episode a 9. I gave it a 7 for an average of 8. So the next one is Blood Wedding.
Here we go.
When Danvers' fiance is killed in a bridal shop robbery, Pendleton takes the case, his first as primary since his stroke. Danvers meddles in the investigation and insists that it be assigned to another detective, but G refuses to do so. A suspect is brought in and interrogated, then hangs himself after a distraught Danvers confronts him. Cox tells Kellerman that she does not want a relationship with him, sending him into a depression that only lifts somewhat after he learns that the grand jury has been postponed. G learns that there will be no high-level support for his detective, and also that an incompetent racist like Gaffney was promoted to captain over him as a reminder of his past failure to support the department. Brody is thrown out of the morgue after sleeping there overnight. So yeah, that was when had another guest appearance by Al Freeman Jr. as Deputy Commissioner James Harris.
To me, I don't think that Gaffney is really a racist. He's just I don't think he really is. I just think he's a bit.
Well, they don't really cover that angle after that first the episode he was introduced when he had the conversation with Pembleton is really the only, at this point anyway, the only time that's really been addressed at all. You know, he talks down somewhat to G, but then he does that to everybody. So it's
and his boss is black,
right.
So let's just say he's a bigot rather than a racist.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, even in his introduction episode, it was established that he's more of a sexist even than a racist because he gives more respect to G than he does to Russert.
Well, G had been doing the job.
Yeah. Well, that's partially experience, but it's also that he's going to respect a male, even a black male, over a woman. Because he kind of has the attitude of, you know, the cop should be male.
Yeah, and I remember, and even in his first scenes, I remember saying about with, they made him look bad, Gaffney.
Yeah. And I don't know whether when they introduced him, they had planned on bringing him back later or not, or whether he was just, because at the time he was mainly there just to give sort of a opportunity for Russert to establish her authority.
Yeah, I think if he'd have been written a bit more strongly, it would have been like a better foil for the other characters rather than this sort of like caricature. And I suppose when they brought him back, they improved him in. They wrote him a little bit better. I would have liked to have seen more of her.
I'll bet you would.
Right.
Of course, the twist there was that she was the public defender. So when that description said the dude hanged himself, but part of the reason was he thought that nobody was going to be on his side because the public defenders wouldn't even be trying that hard to get him off because he killed one of their own.
Yeah. Now, apparently, this is one of your favorite people, Jeff.
Well,
this actor.
I mean, it wouldn't be in real life, but on the show, yeah, he's a great character. And it's a great actor as well playing him. He does such a convincing job of this slimy political guy. And I was actually disappointed that they didn't feature more of him going forward.
Well, maybe his fee was rather large.
Yeah, it could have been. I don't know. But I don't know. It probably would have been less than James Earl Jones, but
Oh, wow.
I don't know for sure. Because James Earl Jones' episodes were before the Star Wars prequels came out. Of course, he didn't have a big part in those anyway. But that sort of brought back Star Wars into the forefront and sort of repopularized some of the original movies as well.
Oh,
so that was before that.
Also, for a while in the 1990s, the original Star Wars trilogy was very hard to get hold of on VHS because Lucas sort of like took them off the market, when they were doing those remastered versions and then re-showing them at the cinema. I think they did start to show the remastered Star Wars at the cinema. So maybe they were showing a Star Wars film in 97 because they showed the original redone versions before they did Phantom Menace in 99.
Well, did they do it as early as 97 though?
Yes, I think what they did is they re-released. They put them back in the cinemas. The remastered versions. They re-showed them at the cinemas to sort of like build up interest again before they released.
Yeah, I knew they did that. I just didn't remember it was that early. I was thinking it was closer to when the new ones were put out.
No, I remember they did all the remastered versions, and they released the remastered versions in 97.
Okay. Well, I'll take your word for it because I don't remember. Anyway, anything else you want to say about Bloodwedding?
No.
Okay. So we both gave gave that one an 8. And the next episode after that was the documentary. In that one, Brody takes advantage of an unexpectedly quiet New Year's Eve to present the detectives with a documentary he has made on the inner workings of the Homicide Unit. The film reveals facts that everyone would prefer to keep private, including the case in which the killer has some bizarre personal habits, and captures a foot chase that runs right through a film shoot headed by director Barry Levinson. The identity of last season's lunch bandit is exposed, none other than Gaffney, and Cox and Kellerman decide to try to start a relationship. Brody shocks the detectives with news that he has sold the documentary to PBS as the clock strikes midnight and the phones begin to ring. So yeah, this was the one with the main case shown was the one about the funeral home guy who was taking the bodies to his home.
Now it's this that makes me hate Gaffney. The fact that he's the lunch bandit.
Yeah, I think
I'm not joking. It's like that kind of thing really bugs me.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I'd be pissed off if somebody was taking my food too.
Right.
My viewpoint on the documentary was kind of mixed. It was a little bit more of a comedic episode, even though we had some dark stuff in it. But obviously, it was intended to be a little bit of a lighthearted break, as well as not a clip show per se, but sort of a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek look at Homicide itself by having Brody do things with his documentary that focused, that kind of, they were able to use some of the criticism that the show had taken, as well as some of the flack from the network, and kind of put that into things that they put on the show and make fun of some of their own stuff, as well as use stuff from David Simon's book. That was probably the best part, was when they had the scenes of the detectives talking to the pretend suspect in the box, and they had the lines directly out of the book for what the detectives, are saying to him. Yeah, we got a little bit more of the artisan in Pembleton, showing him adapting and manipulating a situation where he hit somebody with the car and had to talk his way out of the situation by doing a little bit of flirting with somebody other than his wife.
And him saying, "No, I don't want Mary to see this."
Mm-hmm.
Right. There we go.
There's Barry Levinson.
Right, old school hats. Maybe it's tradition. Like I said, it will be tradition why they wear these old school, hats. Even in 9/11, they didn't have proper breathing gear. Right. Oh, modern technology. This guy was a good actor.
Yeah, that's Melvin Van Peebles. Oh, yeah, that is from the next episode, so you're wanting to go to that one?
Well...
Oh, okay, this is actually showing clips now. I figured out what it is. They showed a montage of scenes at the end, about that episode. I forgot about that. Including some things that Brody would have never actually got on camera, but, if you want to nitpick.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the Kay Howard and the guy.
Mm-hmm. That's the guy that Munch was trying to figure out who was.
minute, connubial bliss was for this to be there, he would have to be in the room.
Yeah, that's, that's it. Like when did Frank let Brody into his daughter's bedroom to take video from?
I think, is this the one I use this as the
yes.
thumbnail? Oh yeah, Bayless is gonna have a...
You see Brody taking advantage of the fact that he lived with different people to have video of them at home.
Oh, I remember this. This is the idea that he would like prop up dead bodies.
Yes.
Yes, that was well done. Yes. Did I give this like a 10 out of 10 or a 9? Something like that?
You gave it a 9, yeah. You said at the time that nothing was good enough for a 10. That would be perfect.
Right.
Although you've given a 10 before. To refresh your memory, I don't actually remember the last one. You may have only given like a couple of episodes 10, but I know you have before. Like you gave Freeman and Adina a 10 from the first season. I remember that.
Right. Right. Walt McPherson.
Yeah, that's he plays Gaffney. So yeah, you gave it a 9. I gave it an 8 for an average of 8.5. And the next episode was Betrayal. In that episode, Bayless becomes the primary in the case of an abused young girl whose body was dumped along I-95. His bad experience with child victims affects his mind so severely that Pembleton has trouble keeping him under control long enough to close the case, and he is distraught when Pembleton helps the girl's mother avoid full responsibility for her child's death. Afterward, Bayless reveals to Pembleton the reason he has trouble with these cases. His uncle sexually molested him as a child, and his father did nothing to protect him, and he says he no longer wants to partner with Pembleton. Brody finally finds a roommate, and Kellerman testifies before the grand jury against the advice of his attorney, and is cleared in the corruption probe as the prosecutor tells him she doesn't understand why good cops like him can't expose bad cops, and tells him, Kellerman, go be a cop. And that seems dumb. But anyway, through the other detectives, although the other detectives congratulate him, he believes they will always think he's dirty. So I'll let you go through those and say anything you want to say while I go get some water. I'll be right back.
Right, this is the good-looking woman with the little fella, but we never actually see any more of her. I don't think. I think that's the good-looking woman. Oh, I think that's because, and the reason we just see him here, folks, is that I think he was directing this episode. Let's go back and check that out. Let's see if he was directing it. Yes, directed by Clark Johnson.
Yep.
Right.
So that was the second episode that he directed. The first one was from the previous season.
So does this woman ever come back?
Well, you asked me. There's the Valentine's Day episode where Brody is seen briefly with a blonde woman, and you asked me if it was the same one, but it was so quick I was like, I'm not sure whether it was or not.
Right.
But she didn't have any lines in the Valentine's Day episode. So. Doesn't have very many in this one either, but she did say something to him.
I don't know what I gave that episode, but...
Betrayal?
Yeah.
You gave Betrayal a 9 as well.
Mm.
And I gave it an 8 for an average of 8.5. Yeah, you know, my mixed bag for me was, 8's obviously still a really good grade, and the only bad part about it was what I mentioned before was the stuff with the prosecutor and Kellerman. I didn't like those scenes, but virtually the rest of it I thought was really effective, almost too effective. You mentioned episodes that a little bit too dark for you, and this one was pretty intense. Having the stuff about the abused girl who's killed with the belt, and we get some good scenes related to that, and where they keep telling the guy to sit down and then tell him to stand up and all that stuff, and then of course the revelation at the end with Bayless when he's telling his story about his uncle to Pembleton, and so it ended with that. Intensity, and then of course Kellerman is cleared, but still has that cloud hanging over him of people are going to suspect that he might have done it and just got off. So it was maybe the darkest episode of the season, because there's a feeling throughout that even the triumphs that people had on the show were always tainted by something. So it's sort of the opposite of every cloud. As the silver lining was, or like every silver lining has a cloud.
Yeah.
There was something throughout all of it that wasn't allowing anybody to fully enjoy themselves.
Yeah, this is something maybe about how the ESTP views ethics. And I asked Maria about something, about whether I could quote her. It's, let's put here. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I think the idea maybe that with Kellerman, that the fact that Kellerman is thinking a lot about his image, and how much is he, that he cares about how other people see him as dirty. And I was wondering how you think like ESTPs see ethics, as do they see it as their reputation rather than. So what I'm sort of trying to say is, if we're using functional terms of like extroverted feeling rather than introverted feeling, where like say INFP concentrates on their internal ethics, you know what I mean, like in the idealist sense, how idealists are. Whereas do you think the ESTP is more about their reputation and their character and their reputation being besmirched, that sort of thing?
Yeah, this might have been the one in the original review where you kept asking the same question over and over again because I didn't give you the answer you wanted.
Yes, and I might be doing that again. But if you just give
this
me
time
your
I have
thoughts.
no problem skipping it. Is there anything else you're going to say about this episode?
No. I'll just.
Okay. So I think I already gave the scores for that one. Yeah. Okay. So the next episode was Have a Conscience. Kellerman returns to duty after his suspension, still bearing resentment toward the press and his colleagues over the corruption probe. His first case, a Korean shopkeeper shot to death in the doorway of his own store, appears to be the work of Luther Mahoney, but it falls apart due to lack of evidence and witnesses. Kellerman's frustration leads him to consider suicide. Lewis is able to talk him out of it, remembering how Cressetti took his own life without asking for any help. Bayless maintains his split from Pembleton, leaving the latter to close an old case on his own. So you could say that this one, was also a very dark episode, but was very different because it focused on Kellerman and what he was going through. And there was a long, uninterrupted scene of him and Lewis on the boat that definitely sort of adds a quiet intensity to the episode. So that's probably the strongest feature. So I thought most of it was really good. I think I probably would have cut that a little bit from what they did. But, if that's the biggest flaw, I can't say that it's too much because, it was still really well done and well acted by the two. Having to carry that whole scene, it's not easy. So.
I've not got any more screenshots until episode 16, Valentine's Day.
Okay. Well, you had some at the time. What happened to
I don't know.
Did you eat them, Ben? Be honest.
I don't know.
Okay, so have a conscience. Ben gave a 9 again. That's 3 consecutive 9s. He was on a roll. And I gave it an 8 or 8.5. The next episode was Diener, with Bayless working alone and Kellerman taking time off. Pembleton and Lewis reluctantly partner up to work the bludgeoning death of a wealthy middle-aged woman. They concentrate on her brother, but the case stalls when he claims that her diamond ring has been stolen by the police. Cox realizes that victim's jewelry has gone missing in several other cases, so she and Brody set up cameras in the morgue to catch the thief. One of her staff members, who is quickly fired and arrested. Mary suggests that she and Pembleton seek marriage counseling without success, then later asks Bayless to resume working with him. Bayless tries to do so, but Pembleton declines. So that episode, I think at the time we both agreed that the plot was a little bit weak. The story itself, not really a whole lot happened, but that there was still a lot of good scenes, good character interaction. Especially between this one, I think you only did have like a few pictures of to begin with. One of the ones you had was Pembleton, Lewis, and G all together in the office because they were discussing their different takes on when they had worked together before. How Pembleton had assumed that the culprit was somebody from the hood, so to speak, and it turned out to be a kid from white neighborhood. And in this case, the roles were sort of flipped in terms of who they were suspecting.
And that was
so there's some discussion of that. Yeah,
this was a flashback because G is mini throw there, and is this the right one?
Yeah, so you got some pictures. Yeah, Kyle Secor.
Oh, there, sorry.
That was his debut as a director on the show. And in his directed episode, he was actually in it more than Clark Johnson has been in the episodes he directed. But then there's another episode later on where Kyle Secor is barely in it at all that he didn't direct. So, I guess it all balances out. But anyway, so the story itself, the thing about the Diener dude stealing from the thing, and all that wasn't all that great, but there was still some good character stuff, especially in that triangle you showed of Pembleton, Lewis, and G.
Yeah.
They got some good scenes.
Right, there we go. 514 Diener. Yeah.
So we both gave that episode a 7 for, of course, an average of 7. Anything else you want to say about that one before we move on?
No, not really. I don't really.
Yeah, I figured once we're done reviewing the episodes themselves that we could talk about a few kind of overarching themes of the season, as well as the personality type stuff.
Yeah.
On a couple of things, and how that developed over the season. But anyway, so the next one was Wu's on first. Elizabeth Wu, the new police reporter for the Baltimore Sun, becomes an annoyance to the homicide unit as Pembleton investigates the case of an off-duty police officer killed after a drug buy. After she mistakenly destroys the victim's reputation and leads the detectives to her source, who turns out to be the shooter, Barnfather takes advantage of a press conference to get her thrown off the police beat. Meanwhile, Kellerman gets an unwelcome surprise visit from his 2 delinquent elder brothers, who are on the run from bookies in Cleveland and have stolen what they think is Babe Ruth's Baltimore Orioles uniform to pay off their debt. And, of course, that was Tate Donovan and Eric Stoltz as the 2 Kellerman brothers. And point of trivia, Reed Diamond, Stoltz, and Donovan all played crew members in the movie Memphis Belle. Joan Chen was Elizabeth Wu. Anyway, my thoughts on that one were that it was another case where they spent a little too much time on a guest character that, while not bad at all, was not compelling enough to carry the episode. So by virtue of that, the story with the Kellerman brothers was more interesting, as you saw a little bit of a role reversal in that Kellerman comes off as almost the guardian of the family when it comes to those, because his brothers are wilder than he is, get in more trouble. So you saw a little bit of, we talked about at the time a little bit, in differences in people that are all SPs.
Yeah.
Where you can see sort of the different degrees of maturity within them and how that plays out in a family. So that was an interesting aspect.
Oh, one thing we could say is like, so for instance, if like all of those brothers were like taking the Kersey temperament sorter, and say if it was the one from Please Understand Me Too, on the say the J versus P questions, do you think they might be more towards P than say Kellerman, and we might be a bit more in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance, especially if Kellerman was kind of in one of those modes where he's trying to be like, I'm a good cop, where you were talking like him worrying about his reputation. He might kind of answer more of the J questions to try to make himself look better. Because as we've talked about before, the way that those things are worded does kind of come off as the J is like the responsible one who shows up on time and does what they're supposed to do, as opposed to the slovenly person that's always late and doesn't ever have a plan. And as I always say, in my case it's true, but not all perceivers fit that stereotype.
Or, as you've talked about in a video before, they would prefer to do that, but they decide not to do that. Whereas with the SJs, they actually prefer to do it and do it.
Right. Yeah, SJs actually feel bad when they don't have things planned and scheduled and traditional and stuff, whereas any kind of perceiver type is not usually going to feel bad about that. It's just that they will do that preparation as a necessity because of the job, or because even if it's recreation, that they're going to end up getting more enjoyment out of it if they do some thinking ahead to prepare for it, things like that. All right, so Ben gave that a 7. I gave it an 8 for an average of 7.5. Next episode was Valentine's Day.
I have images for this.
Featuring a guest appearance by Neil Patrick Harris.
Doogie Howser, MD.
Yes, as Alan Shack. After a man is found dead in the apartment of one of Brody's graduate school classmates, Munch is ready to write it off as a suicide, but Brody refuses to let him drop the matter. Munch and Howard investigate further, and with Brody's help, lay a trap that exposes the classmate as a murderer. Of course, that trap was that they recorded him going into his place, or into the guy's place, and added in sound effect of a shot to make him think that it was recorded the day that the guy was actually shot.
Yes, I don't know how they have that technology to make it sound realistic.
Kellerman and Bayless uncover the connection in between a pair of bombing deaths, the trial of a man who killed the Korean shopkeeper and Have a Conscience, and race to stop the perpetrator from completing a campaign of revenge against those responsible for his acquittal. Marriage counseling for Pimbleton and Mary only leads to worsening arguments between them. After he misses Olivia's baptism, Mary takes her and moves out. So yeah, we had some intense scenes there. The counseling stuff were kind of painful, and then we had the other stuff going on with. Excuse me, a bit of a coughing attack there. So yeah, I remember at the time, Ben said he liked the fact that there wasn't some explanation for what they were doing to defuse the bomb. They just went ahead and showed.
Yeah, they just showed it.
Yeah, and of course the judge that he was going to blow up was the same judge that we've seen before, the mother of the Elijah Wood character.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, like here, you just show what's going to happen and the audience can work it out.
Yeah. We got a lesson from, Cox and Lewis. When you're in a building and the bomb squad is coming in and they tell you to get out of the building, just get out of the building. Don't stop to ask them what's going on.
Right, and here's an example of good acting where right at that moment, on a certain level, he is really feeling it. where he's put himself in a space where he's actually feeling the emotion.
Yeah, and this is the roller coaster because Frank was saying before this to his wife that he feels like, he's really back to feeling like his old self again. And meanwhile, she's feeling that they've grown more apart. So that was like the moment of realization where he's like, I don't have anything without them. That's the girl. If you go back a couple, you asked me if that was the same girl from the other one. I don't know. On first glance, she looks different, but I'm not sure. It might be the same girl. I don't think she's in the credits of this one because she doesn't have any lines. She only shows up in that one little bit while he's walking out with her. But at this point, anyway, you see Lewis is still with his wife, so they're still together at least. And then, of course, at the end, we have a unrealistic but still effective choice to have the two prisoners right next to each other in the line, so we can highlight both of them at the end of the episode in our little musical montage. So yeah, Ben gave that one a 7, and I gave it a 9 for an average of 8.
So if we were to graph my scores, have they dipped down a little bit?
Yeah. After 3 consecutive 9s, we've now had 3 consecutive 7s. And in fact, it'll end up being 5 consecutive 7s before the next one that you rated higher. So the next one is Cottish. Strangulation death of a woman in a parking garage stirs up childhood memories for Munch, since she, her ex-husband, and her current boyfriend all attended high school with him, and he remembers when she was the most popular girl in his class, and it was nice to him even though he was a scrawny nerd, which of course he really isn't that scrawny or nerdy in the not enough in my opinion. But anyway, as he and Kellerman work the case, which shows connections with a series of recent attacks on other women, the Jewish rituals surrounding the burial cause him to think about his own lapse of faith. After Pembleton's interrogation skills fail him in the box, he looks in vain for comfort in a dinner with Bayless and attendance at morning mass, and then goes on a call with Bayless. And of course, what happens at that call is they find the woman who died in her sleep in her bed. And has some music playing, and they talk about Pamela Peyton Wright, who plays the nun that we met back in season 3, that Pembleton talks to about where is he supposed to find God now that his wife has left him. So this episode sort of had a theme about, finding God or those aspects of things. And we mentioned at the time that Linda McGivney, that wrote the teleplay, that I think it was the first and only time she wrote for Homicide, and it sort of showed in that the characters were maybe not as well characterized as they are in some other episodes. It seemed like someone who wasn't as familiar with the characters.
And we agreed that these flashback scenes could have been a lot better.
Yeah, they were a little bit generic, a little bit Hollywoodish, and just
they could have been hilarious. They could have really asked Richard Belzer what were the sort of things that, from his own childhood that maybe they could try to.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways they could have gone with it where it would have been better. As it ends up just sort of, you talked in another thing earlier about padding. It almost, in a way, seemed like that, which is unfortunate because it's like, you're thinking, well, this is a good idea to showcase some stuff about Munch and his childhood, but then what they end up doing with it really isn't that interesting. So.
He looks like a young John Hodgman.
I don't know who that is, but
right.
But yeah, he was too good looking. That was part of the problem, but not the only problem.
Yeah, Munch has big ears. I mean,
yeah. If anything, I guess it really. I don't know how Belzer felt about it. Did he look at this kid and say, "Hey, I wasn't too bad as a teenager"? Or did he look at it and say, "Man, I really let myself go"?
Well, I mean, what you could say, he's the kind of guy that nerdy girls would put a poster up on the wall of, like that NT guy. Like with Doctor Who, like when it was Matt Smith, like they put him on the wall, like the NF and NT girls would have him on the wall. He would be on the wall for them.
Yeah, he needed more acne and, like you said, bigger ears and just and to be more
Munchie.
Socially awkward and everything. Yeah.
Oh, that looks like it. Oh, hey, hang on a minute. Look at that for an advanced keyboard in '97. Looks like you got like a thumb pad on there and everything.
Yeah, check it out.
That might have cost like $300 or something.
Top of the line, man. Yeah, so anyway, both of us gave that one a 7 for another average of 7.
Yeah. Just go. Right.
We deviated more on the next one, but after Cottish was Double Blind.
I'm just going through these.
Well,
because there's some good images to get through.
So in Double Blind, Charlie Flavin, the man who shot and blinded Officer Chris Thorman 4 years ago, has become eligible for parole, and the news has left Thorman unable to think about anything else. His wife and Lewis tried to help him pass this moment. At the parole hearing, Thorman makes a statement that results in Flavin being put away for another 5 years. While investigating the death of an abusive husband at his daughter's hands, Bayless and Pemberton sharply disagree over the question of whether abuse victims deserve any blame for not leaving their abusers. Bayless later confronts the uncle who molested him as a child. Kellerman spends time with Cox and revealed that he had been considering suicide. So, this one, we weren't quite as far apart as we were on The Heart of a Saturday Night, but I gave it a 10, you gave it a 7. To me, it's one of my favorite episodes. I really love them bringing back the Thorman situation and, kind of revisiting that. Even if they hadn't had the deal about the parole hearing, just kind of revisiting him and seeing, how he's doing was a good plot line. And the other plot with the girl with the abusive dad, who was abusing the wife, I really liked that one as well for several reasons. That they just from the beginning, I liked the realism of it in that they didn't sugarcoat the stuff, and they made an interesting angle in that it wasn't the typical, we're going to make the daughter 100% sympathetic because she's in this situation. They made it more like, she really did take revenge on the guy, from having her put him on his knees and stuff like that. And you had, apparently Ben didn't take as many pictures of this episode.
No.
You keep going through the same one. I don't think you have a single picture of the actual girl that was the killer, unless you haven't shown one. That's a different girl. That one was not as good an actress as the one who was the actual shooter. But
yeah, we agreed on that one.
Yeah. But you had multiple pictures of her and none of the other one.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's a bit dark this episode, a little bit too dark for me.
I obviously, as I've established, I don't think so, and I don't like dark stuff, and I didn't think this was dark. It was intense, but it was emotionally powerful, and that's the thing to me is that, as I see that as a different thing. Darkness just for the sake of darkness, I have no interest in, but something where you have intense things going on that are realistic situations, and you bring out the emotions of people, and this episode had both stories had that, both in Chris Thorman's experience and in the girl who killed her father. There was a lot of that in both aspects, as well as, of course, exploring the different takes that Bayless and Pemberton had on the situation of abuse from their different perspectives. And I remember that Mr. Morris, not being familiar with temperament, seemed to think that there was a role reversal with Pemberton and Bayless, but there really wasn't. They were both pretty consistent with their characters up at this point in terms of the way they reacted to that situation, with Bayless being more about having a duty to prosecute the person, and Pemberton being a little bit more compassionate towards the girl in that situation. And there also being even a little bit of anger from Bayless in terms of the wife not getting out of an abusive situation, and some of the guilt of his own situation coming up in that as well. So Oh, that was really effective for me, and that's why it's right up there.
Right.
It's my favorites. So yeah, as I said, I gave it a 10. Ben gave it a 7. Average of 8.5 for that one. Then we moved on to probably the climax of the season.
Heavy black dude in a bed.
both in intensity and in quality, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We had probably, right up there with the previous one and Hostage as the top episodes of the season, in my opinion. And that was Deception. The death of a Nigerian drug courier brings the homicide and narcotics units together in a plan to smash Luther Mahoney's organization. Mahoney shoots one of his own men and a bystander in a panic, and is then killed by Kellerman under questionable circumstances, with Lewis and Sivers also on the scene. All three write up the incident as a case of self-defense. Meanwhile, an ex-convict calls Munch with information on an old murder. This turns out to be a ruse so he can find the quote-unquote victim and kill him. Bayless agrees to re-partner with Pemberton, then slips out without telling anyone to look after his uncle. Featured a guest appearance of Lewis Black as Punchy de Leon. He was the guy who had them dig up a place for him to bury his murder victim. And you had show like just how young a kid they had working in the operation, with the kid on the bike, working in the drug business. Now, I think we'll get into this maybe a little bit more, or maybe we'll just do it here. I don't know if we want to take this video to drag on too long, but I even asked Morgan again what he thought about the type for Luther Mahoney, because the last time we talked about that, we sort of were flip-flopping a bit between ESTP and ENTJ. And I'm not sure whether this episode and what happened in here, it could be a case either way, because you can say that the way he kind of freaked out with what happened to him, you say, well, he's not an artisan because he wasn't good at adapting. Or you could say, well, maybe he is because he hadn't thought ahead for something like this happened. So it's kind of funny, you could make a case either direction.
What about ISTP? Why wouldn't he be ISTP?
Yeah, and that's what Morgan actually said, is that he thought he might be more that, because he said he didn't really get the vibe from them. And usually he feels like for the ESTP characters, he sort of gets that from them. And he actually suggested ISTP, I think, when I said something like that he was, if he was an SP, that he was one that had developed his strategic side a little more.
Yeah,
and
and
said that maybe that indicated it could be an ISTP.
And as we know, ISTPs can do systems and structure, because quite a few of them are computer programmers, and that was something that Kersey didn't necessarily have enough of in his book, because he didn't have that experience of ISTPs in that area.
Yeah, as I've said many times before, the IE is the hardest to figure out, and because you can't really tell just from observing them in a few.
For certain types.
What?
I think for certain types, the I and E.
I mean, I think for everybody, it's the hardest of the dichotomies to figure out. But I think, some people obviously are just really extreme one way or the other, but most people aren't. And I guess the reason I leaned toward E for him was just because of how active he is kind of publicly, socially in the community, trying to be kind of the guy who's right. As most ISTPs, I think, would grow tired of that pretty quickly. They're not as much wanting to do all the social networking type of stuff that he does.
I see, man. So it's about his image, yes.
Yeah, and Morgan pointed out that he was kind of flashy. He cared about his style and wanting to sort of have a certain image that he carried.
Yeah.
But also, I said he definitely did not seem to fit the image of like the INTJ kind of mastermind behind the scenes type of thing.
No.
So that's why I suggested he could possibly be an ENTJ. But. So we're still undecided on Luther Mahoney, even though he's dead now. We haven't come to a conclusion on his type completely.
Well, maybe if he were better written, you could maybe say he was ESTP.
Dang. You're just gonna crack on the writing.
Well, what I mean is, like, if it was slightly better written, there's certain, but
yeah, I mean,
Mahoney.
of course, what David Simon said is that you had to write him like basically the Simon and Fontana were kind of like pulling in slightly different directions, and the network, of course, had a big thing about it also. As if Fontana was more content with having some things that were make believe and not the way that would have been realistic. Simon was kind of more the one who always tried to inject the realism, and Yoshimura was sort of like he sort of sided with Simon some of the time. He said he always liked to go in there and ask him, what would you do in this situation? What do you think that the cops would do? He was kind of leaned on him a lot that way. And then, of course, the network was always like, do whatever, is flashier and gets better ratings kind of thing, more sex appeal, more violence, more, these things that you can put in promos to make it seem exciting. So I don't think he was badly written. I just think you had a lot of different elements to it, and you couldn't make it the Luther Mahoney show, so you weren't going to have him quite as developed as some of the other characters. It wasn't going to be like Family Matters where Urkel became the star of the show. You weren't going to.
Right.
In fact, David Simon actually said they made him too important to the point where they said we got to get rid of this guy. So
I'll take that back a bit. I just think that he could have been acted a little bit differently. Well, he could have been acted better. It was acted okay. He could have been acted better. But that would require sort of like a movie Hollywood standard, a better actor, of which there are not that many around, that would, and it would probably be a bit older. But
I didn't have a problem with the way he was acted at all. I just
well, I never say I didn't say I had a problem with it. I can just imagine better actor. That's all.
All right, but. To me, all that's required of an actor is to make the character believable in terms of you believe that is the character that's being presented to you in the show. And if I do, then I can't fault their acting. So to me, that I don't have for 1 second sit there and say he's not Luther Mahoney, he's this other guy. Right. So there's nothing to jump on as far as the acting. Anyway, the other storyline, of course, we had with Munch and Punchy. I liked the cleverness of that and the way they set that up, although I do think it made Munch look bad a little bit. So I think, maybe we said at the time reviewing it, they maybe could have had a few more lines about that, with Munch saying how the guy had made him look like a fool or something, And, of course, this episode, as we get through the pictures, has the most replayed scene ever on Homicide, where Coleman shoots Mahoney, and that will
with the double-handed grip. Good.
Was already had some ramifications on the show, and will continue to be a huge part of definitely the next season, and really the rest of the show. And will have an impact on over the next season or so. All right, so that one I gave a 10, and Ben gave a 9 for an average of 9.5. Then we moved on to Narcissus, which was an episode written by Yaphet Kotto. A murder suspect fleeing from police takes shelter at the headquarters of the African Revival Movement. Interference by both Barnfather and Gaffney leads the unit to realize that someone is pulling strings to stall them. That person is ARM leader Burundi Robinson, who initiates an armed standoff when the police try to serve an arrest warrant. He tells G about his time on the force, serving with Deputy Commissioner Harris, and losing his job due to Harris's misconduct after a drug bust. Robinson and 15 ARM members commit suicide before they can be apprehended, and G promises to expose Harris's illegal acts. Bayless is nowhere to be found until the standoff is nearly over, and Stivers voices her worries about the Mahoney shooting to Kellerman and Lewis. This one was another case of where I thought it was a bit of a letdown after the high of the last episode. There was a little bit of kind of forced action that wasn't, it wasn't as good as the previous one, and some of the guest characters weren't as compelling. I didn't really, have that much interest in Burundi Robinson and his stuff, but there were still some good scenes in it. Plenty of good dialogue and stuff, interactions with the characters, and so I still enjoyed the episode quite a bit. Just wasn't up to the top standards of Homicide. So, anything you wanted to say about that one?
Well, I think I quite like this one because it touched on certain issues, and with Bundy Robinson, I like the fact that it had more of a backstory with Harris, so I like that aspect. And if people want to know what I think of this episode, see the review.
Yeah, well, Ben even waffled on that because he said it was a 10, and then he later said he pulled it down to a 9, and then he pulled it down to an 8.
Yeah.
So he hemmed and hawed all over the place with that one. Yeah. And finally settled on 8. I gave it a 7, so the average of 7.5. And then we had the 2-part wrap-up of the season, Partners and Other Strangers and Strangers and Other Partners, which of course dealt with the death of Bo Felton and the ramifications of that. The way this describes it, Pimbleton responds to a shooting call and is shocked to find that the victim is Bo Felton, who has apparently committed suicide. Auto Squad Detective Paul Falzone visits the squad room and voices his theory that Felton was leaking information to a car theft ring he was trying to bust. Cox's autopsy reveals that Felton was in fact murdered, and G learns that Stuart Gardy, now a detective working in internal investigation, sent Felton into the ring undercover to find the leak. Russert returns from France to help with the investigation. Lewis tries to settle Stiver's mind over the Mahoney shooting, and Pimbleton finds out that Bayless has been taking care of his uncle in order to forgive him. Kellerman and Cox spend another night together. Gaffney tries to insult G over the fact that Harris has resigned in disgrace, but G makes it clear he is not scared of Gaffney anymore. Then the second part, G brings Falzone and Gardy in on the Felton murder, irritating the detectives who remember Gardy's cowardice as a patrolman the previous year. Howard and Russert are taken off the case so they can plan the funeral since they are both too emotionally involved. Falzone and Gardy realize they have been using the same informant who brought Felton into the car theft ring. Then blew his cover and set him up to be killed by the leader. By the time the unit raids the hideout, though, everyone in the ring has disappeared. A hungover Kellerman argues with Cox and annoys Lewis by losing track of a witness for a case they are working. Pimbleton reconciles with Mary, now 6 months pregnant, and she agrees to move back home. After a ceremony in Felton's honor, G learns that the department is starting a rotation program that may scatter his detectives. So both Ben and I agreed that the first part was better than the second one in this case, and they did a good job in setting up, the story. It's kind of difficult. I think this is actually true with a lot of shows that do like 2-parter finales like that, is that part 1 usually is more intense and exciting than part 2 is. There's some exceptions to that, but for the most part, that tends to be the case, where you kind of have all this stuff you set up, but then you feel like you have to wrap it all up in the second part. And so it was a bit of a letdown in that sense. But there's a lot of great stuff in it. I liked the way they used the flashbacks of Felton. I liked all the different stuff, all the different elements that they were able to get into that first episode. Whereas the second one felt like there was a little bit slowed down, and the stuff, the focus was a bit off, I think we said.
When they originally broadcast it, were the 2 episodes shown back to back on the same night?
No, they were a week apart.
Right.
Coming up next season, there will actually be one where they broadcast back to back. So at that point, I'll ask you whether you want to watch them both at the same time or do it over 2 weeks, because in reruns they might have been shown over 2 weeks because they are 2 separate episodes, but originally they were aired back to back. But we'll get to that next season.
He said something in the review that I take issue with his logic. He said he'd take, because like you said, he doesn't know about temperament. He says takes care of him in order to forgive him. That's backwards.
That is kind of what he said. He said he said
but he would have done it anyway. He would have taken care of him anyway.
Well,
even
so.
without needing for that.
That is what he said, though. What Bayless said. He said he did it because he was hoping that it would allow him to forgive him.
Right.
So yeah, that's just giving the facts of what he said that he'd been doing. You can obviously read a lot more into it, temperament based or otherwise.
Okay, fair enough. But I would think that Bayliss would have a natural instinct to take care of people.
Yeah, I think he does, and I think that what I said earlier, and I restate, as we're kind of wrapping it up here, is that this storyline with him and his uncle was what fully convinced me for sure that Bayliss was an ISFJ or a protector guardian in the Kersey system, because his mindset is very much on filling that role, on protecting people that he thinks need protection. And you could, it's another case where you really wanted to get into it. You could go back into the whole nurture versus nature thing and say how much of the way Bayliss was treated as a child played into that in terms of his instinct to protect people. Because some people would say, abused kids have that instinct more than ones that haven't been, that they feel like, they might have feelings of revenge towards their abuser, but they also have an instinct to protect other people from the same thing or from similar things. So that could factor into it as well, as a guardian temperament or protector role. So again, that kind of thing can be debated endlessly. How much is what?
If we say that Bayliss is Enneagram Type 2, the helper, their self-image really is about helping people, and it's almost as if that's also where they get a lot of their self-esteem from. And I think Bayliss has, like, he gets really beats up on himself when would you say he really beats up on himself when he's not able to help people, when he's failed in his attempts to help people?
Yeah, I think he has, he kind of has a down kind of feeling when that happens, yeah. When he starts to feel hopeless about things. Which is, why some people, at first glance, if they just saw some of his reactions to some of those type of things, might even say they thought he was an idealist or an NF. But, if you see the character as a whole through the show, then, it becomes pretty obvious he's a sensing type, but just one with very strong feeling.
Tom Condon said in a Q&A that he did, he's an Enneagram guy, that the Enneagram Type 2, when they help someone, and ISFJ's protectors are usually Enneagram Type 2, the helper, where they really merge together the needs of the person they're helping with their own needs, and it's almost like that vicarious thing of like imaginatively putting themselves in somebody else's shoes, where it's like them helping somebody else makes the Enneagram Type 2, the ISFJ, feel a lot better just by the act of helping somebody else, and with that instinct within him is so strong. It's what people who wouldn't know about typology would call the, like, say, the maternal instinct or something like that. And that is that's the thing. And I think that would have been there anyway, even without the child abuse thing, because we know about the temperament aspects. Yeah. It's almost as if the child abuse thing was, get that out of there. It's muddying the waters.
Well, I think it's a matter of, like, you don't know how much is what, and some people would say psychologically that would be the onus for it, but I would say that it probably already was there, and it just sort of exacerbated it, brought it out. And of course, they could do a whole another study on that. I'm sure there have been people that are there. Kids of a certain type or temper that are more likely to be abuse victims. They're more likely to allow that to happen. And
yes.
You know,
in my opinion, certain types are more likely to do. But it's not hard and fast. Tom Condon was asked about this, about Enneagram type, where he was asked nature or nurture, and he gave the answer yes. It's a combination of the both. But he says that.
That's true. I think it's hard to argue that there aren't elements of both that factor into how someone is. But anyway, on those, real quick, the ratings we gave for those season finales.
Right.
The part 1, Ben gave it an 8. I gave it a 9 for average of 8.5. And part 2, Ben gave a 7, and me an 8 for an average of 7.5. So if you add up all those scores for the season, Ben's average for the season is 7.77. And mine is 8.68. And if you average those two together, then you get 8.23. So that's what our collective opinion is on Homicide Season 5.
Right. And so I think Tom gave the opinion that nurture is maybe more important when someone goes towards something, say their low side, where maybe the negative traits of a person comes out just because of their nurture. Characteristics, but that might just be a way of like spinning things for saying, oh, he's only like that because he's had a bad upbringing or something like that, so rather than trying to blame a negative quality on something intrinsic.
I think that there are, and to double back on that, I mean, go on this forever, but there's some types of people that are more likely to blame upbringing for things than others too. All right, so to wrap this up, we talked a little about Mahoney's type. I talked about how Bayless's actions sort of solidified, my viewpoint on his type.
I agree.
Of course, one of the major plot lines this season, at least for the first half or more of it, was Frank's stroke, and the recovery from that. I think one of the best, one of the qualities that makes the show so good is they had this huge event happen in his life, this traumatic thing, a brain, injury and everything, but they still established that even as he struggled to get back to his old self, quote unquote, he really was still the same person. He had changes, but it was, he hadn't become a different person. And I thought it was very effective and good to show that it wasn't just like, again, there's such a typical sort of Hollywood thing of, oh, we can use this thing as a plot device to change this character to some other thing we want it to be so we can experiment with that. Instead, they stayed very true to the character, and the things he struggled with, the things that he had problems with, were still, when his freedom was limited, when his individuality was limited, when he was held back of the things he was able to do to really fully express himself and do the things that he got excitement and passion out of life with. Those were the things that losing those things was the most frustrating to him. Somebody else going through the same experience might have had different elements that were most important, but that was still, in the SP temperament, it's like freedom is number one, and losing freedom, being restrained and restricted in how we can do things and how we can express ourselves and how we can use our talents, that's like the most frustrating and depressing thing that we can experience. And so I thought it was very good to see that journey, even though some people, and I kind of agree, said it should have lasted longer, that he should have taken longer than half a season or so to recover. But I still think even within the time frame that they used, that they did a good job with that.
I remember thinking when they had the turning point at the end of season 4, I remember thinking about, okay, this is the climax. They better not have him get over it too quickly. And I would have been annoyed. And I'm glad that they did string it out. And
do you think it was too quickly, or do you think that it was about right?
I think it's probably about right. I think maybe in one or two episodes that they sort of like, it was like one episode he was like fine and back to normal, and then the next episode it like still showed some effects of the stroke. So
yeah, and I don't know, I haven't studied stroke victims and recovery stuff enough to know whether or not that's something that can happen, where there's sort of like relapses and things like that. I don't really know how often that happens. And of course, there's still elements to it that you think over time, even when someone seems to be fully recovered, anytime you have an injury that involves the brain, you can have sort of things that appear to be kind of random that are based on something that happened, where parts of the brain almost sort of get reactivated and some get deactivated. And since you can, with the memories, you can suddenly like have memories that came back to you that you didn't remember before, and meanwhile forget other stuff. And so that's the kind of thing that could happen with stroke victims over time, is that after a long period of time, even after many years, that something could change as far as that aspect of it. So anyway,
and if people want to see more about that, if they go to the video I did with Dario Nardi on introverted sensing, Imogen is on there talking about her traumatic brain injury and the sort of like the things that she could do afterwards, and then things that she could no longer do on her sort of like road to recovery.
Good plug there. So all right, so we covered the Luther Mahoney story, we covered Hamilton the stroke, Bayless and the uncle and that story. Any other aspects of the season that you wanted to discuss? I think anybody that changed or grew in some way?
Well, I like the addition of Juliana because I like Michelle Forbes as an actress.
Yeah, okay. In a way, I did. I don't mind her as a character. The aspect that frustrated me was not even like having her romantic involved with Kelvin like that. I don't have a problem with that. My issue was more with the unrealism of having her at practically every crime scene. Keith Meadows, for example, that seemed a little bit like, okay, I can buy she's more hands-on than the previous chief. That I don't have a problem with, but her being like at every crime scene, even at 3 a.m, that's a little hard to believe. That seems like a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah, and also, why are they there in the morning? Because don't they? So they have a night shift, don't they? So
well, they're not always, but they established even in the first season that they had that the day shift had occasional nights that they were responsible for. So they basically. It was sort of like, I don't know how often, but one night every few weeks or something that they're assigned to work the night shift. So,
and as people who may not know, filming at night is more expensive than filming during the day.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's just the way the rates are, which is certainly the case in England. It's more, and it says in books. Like in screenwriting books, that it is more expensive if you want, say, to shoot at night or shoot in particular kinds of weather, just because of the rates for the cast and crew for a night shoot. It's more expensive.
Well, one of the good things about season 5 was that all the episodes in production order were actually shown in broadcast order, so it all lined up. It's the only season that's true about in the whole show. So that part was cool.
For me, especially.
Yeah, except Ben still found a way to get a couple of episodes reversed anyway. But yeah, in a lot of ways, of the complete seasons, when I mean by that, I mean like a full TV season of 20 plus episodes. It's probably my favorite of the complete seasons, although 1 and 2 together are probably the pinnacle of Homicide. This is right up there, though. Like we mentioned, David Simon's influence was a positive thing, and some of the other aspects of the continuing stories they had across this season. So it had a few, slight dips along the way, and some episodes that weren't quite as interesting, but overall it maintained a really high standard of quality. I don't have in front of me what my averages were for the last 2 seasons, but I think they were lower actually than this one, and I definitely know I gave more 10 out of 10s because I gave 5 in this season, whereas season 3 I know I only had 2 10s, and Season 4, I don't remember for sure. There may have only been a couple in that one too. So yeah, the reached a higher quality point. As far as what's to come, some more ups and downs. There are some things that I really like in season 6, and other things not so much. So it kind of there's more extremes. I'll put it that way, because there's some really good stuff and some stuff that I can do without. So, and then season 7 is probably even more that way. But I will say this as a not spoiler, but just as a teaser of good things to keep you involved, is that you have talked about certain elements. Even though you said that you don't really like the dark episodes, you've also said you like when the characters are edgier. So the next season, I think, brings some more of that in terms of they explore a little bit more of the edgy or darker side to the characters. So, maybe there's some of both. I don't know how you'll take it exactly, but anyway, I guess are there any final comments you want to make about season 5?
Yeah, like I said, I think it's been the best season since the first one or two. The best full-length season with the improvement in dialogue, and seeing there with some of my scores.
Mm-hmm.
I can see, and also I was a little bit bored by all of the Bo storyline with his affairs and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I found that a little bit boring. That would have been in season 3, I think. I'm not sure.
Yep.
Am I right in thinking that they're going to have Garrity team up with Munch?
I'm not going to answer that question because
Okay.
I think we'll let those things settle in. I will say this: Guardian Munch will have some good scenes involving the two of them. I'll just put that because there's a definite contrast in their temperaments, their takes on things, their viewpoints, their worldviews are definitely quite different. So you'll see some good scenes, I think, between those two.
Oh, good.
As well as, here's a tiny bit of a spoiler. Coming up in the first storyline of season 6, not necessarily the first episode, but in the first story arc, the Guardian and Pimbleton have a really good scene together. So I was just telling Morgan of his scenes that those were a couple of my favorites, were his confrontations with Pimbleton and Munch in a couple of particular episodes. But anyway, that's about all I'll say about that for now. And I'll just say that for everybody, once again, the first episode of season 6 is called Blood Ties, and definitely begins with a bang and features some personnel changes and some stuff that carries over from the previous stories, as well as some new elements. And the first episode, James Earl Jones is on there, as well as Lynn Thigpen, if you know who she is. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff in Blood Ties. So that'll be next.
So we have one viewer. What would you like to say to this viewer?
I would say thank you for viewing, even if it was only for the last few minutes, and go back and watch the rest of this when you get done, as we review all the great stuff from season 5. And if you haven't already, then watch the individual reviews for more in-depth discussion of not only the episodes, but of the characters and their personality types as well.
Yeah. So bye-bye, folks.
Bye-bye.